As a general cardiologist, I frequently see patients that need Dr. Wendt services. They might have a heart that's going too slow or too fast. We might do everything we can with medications or changes in lifestyle, and we still have hearts that aren't doing quite right. So we're lucky that we have Dr. David Wendt here today to answer some of our specific questions. And I'd like to ask you, Dave, how did you get interested in the field of electrophysiology and cardiology? How's your journey reached this point?
Good question. My father was an internist when I grew up, and we had 7 kids, and the only way I thought I could ever talk to him, because he was so busy, was, gee, if I started to show an interest in science, and that was an entree for that. And of course, you go through the natural rebellion as a kid, and I found myself at Calvin College, which was a Christian college up in Michigan, and they had a very good science program, and I just gravitated towards that. And as I went further along in it, I found that there were areas of medicine, as there are today, where people just don't understand what is the reason for a particular illness or entity. And as I went through my cardiology rotations, the big one was, why are people dying suddenly? What is this thing called ventricular tachycardia? What are these fast heart rates that people had? And most of my professors had very little knowledge of those things. So when I went into my fellowship, this burgeoning field of electrophysiology was suddenly on the forefront of discovering these things, and that really piqued my interest at the time. I think one of the things as we go through our lives, there are these maxims that we have in our faith. You know, be still and know that I am God. You find a quiet space in your heart and make yourself calm, but when your heart is beating irregularly, it creates a great deal of anxiety in a patient or in an individual. And so this became a very intriguing journey for me. How do these hearts do the things they do? How do they keep steady? What triggers them to be chaotic, and why? And what can we do to stop that? And it was a very interesting start.
Well, I also think this field has grown enormously. I mean, the treatments and devices we have now that actually help tremendously, we just didn't have 20 years ago.
We didn't. There's a fellow named Earl Bakken who years ago in the late 50s met with a surgeon in Minneapolis, Dr. Lilly High, and he had some adolescent children there. And the surgeon came to him and said, if we don't do something for these kids, they're going to die. And so he went to his garage, put together some wires and an alternator, battery, and they implanted them. And these were the first pacemakers in this country.
Wow.
And these kids made it. And from that inauspicious beginning, we have all these medical companies that are driving this technology, which is remarkable.
Wow. Well, we're going to talk about that. What we've done is we've collected questions from all over the world, all over the United States, regarding electrophysiology, and we've grouped them together. And if you might have a question on electrophysiology or any other medical field, we want to invite you to visit our website, which is heartwiseministries.org, or you can write us at P.O. Box 8. That's Heartwise Ministries, P.O. Box 8, Ottawa, Tennessee, 37363. Well, we're going to move on to our first question now. This first question comes from an 83-year-old who's recently been to the doctor. He says he's on no medication and he feels well. However, recently it was found that his heart's going very, very slow, and his internist is recommending he see a doctor about a pacemaker. So I guess his question to us is who might need a pacemaker, and let's explain a little bit what it is and what it does.
Right. Well, of course, when we're born, our heart rate usually is around 80 to 100 beats per minute. And when you read the textbooks that we all read, average heart rate is 72 beats a minute. And that goes up or down depending on our activity. And if you're Lance Armstrong, your heart rate may be 40 beats a minute. So it is a little bit individualized. But as we age, these cells that normally trigger the rate of the heart die off a bit. And it's very common when we get into our 80s and 90s for our heart rates to slow down. If that slowness starts to cause symptoms, particularly dizziness, tiredness, shortness of breath, or passing out, then that's a point in time certainly where something needs to be done to intervene. And the pacemaker, as we just talked about, is the tool today that we use to prevent that heart rate from getting too slow. And they're very wonderful, sophisticated devices that are very easy to implant today. They've gone through a lot of iterations of technology, but they really are life-saving and life-changing for many, many people.
Now, how big is a pacemaker?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. So this one is one of the bigger pacemakers. This actually has 3 leads into it, but most pacemakers just have 2. One lead goes to the upper chamber of the heart and the other to the lower chamber of the heart. They're about the size, this, as I said, is a little bigger. They're about the size of a silver dollar or a $half. They're fairly thin, and you can feel them under the skin, but they don't really protrude at all. And the battery and the computer in them last about 8 to 10 years today. And so they actually are quite remarkable pieces of technology.
Now, we've got lots of questions about pacemakers. Can patients with pacemakers go through MRIs? And can they get CAT scans? And do they go off when they go to the airport? We get those questions a lot.
All the time. And they are working feverishly. There now is a company and some devices that are MRI safe. They're not yet released by the FDA. Most of the time, you can have a CAT scan or CT scan without any difficulty. And all of the other imaging modalities, as long as they don't use the big magnets, are fine.
Okay.
But when you start to go through airport security, they're going to shut the alarm off or turn the alarm on, and then, of course, they're going to say, gee, are you carrying something illegal? And you've got to... But what we tell our patients is take the card, present it to the security personnel, and they'll do a hand search or they'll do a wand search and get you through without any trouble. Theoretically, they've had reports where if you stand in the pylons of the metal detectors at stores, department stores, that can kind of interact with the battery too. But the reports have been where an individual in a wheelchair has been left by his family between these pylons, and it talks to it a little bit. You probably don't want to do that.
Now, this always comes up, but what about pacemakers and cell phones? Can pacemakers and cell phones, do they have any relationship at all? Or?
There are certainly some interactions that can occur if you have the cell phone right over the pacemaker. So if you're someone who wears your phone in the pocket and the pacemaker's right there, you're probably going to have to change pockets. Okay. And, you know, we say, gee, stay 4 to 6 inches away from the device with the phone if you can. But I have to say that over the years of doing this, I have yet to have someone who's had an adverse interaction with a cell phone.
Now, this gentleman's 82, and what would happen to him if he did not have a pacemaker? Well, what would be the natural history? I mean, would he be okay? Would he die? Or, I mean, I guess that's impossible knowing all the details, but what's sort of
if we take a general setting, let's say that he has a blockage in the upper and lower conduction system, between those two, it usually is progressive, and at some point in time, either the heart rate will get very slow in the 20 beat per minute range, or potentially he could be walking down a stair or even driving and actually pass out. So we like to be able to preemptively deal with folks that we know are on that path and try to prevent that from happening. You
know, I guess the point I would like to bring out is before we had pacemakers, these patients would die or have dangerous accidents, and now we can prevent that.
Yeah.
We have a lot of people that will call in and say, you know, we believe in God, we don't believe in modern medicine. But God has really given us modern medicine to enhance our lives, and this, I can't think of anything more that increases longevity than pacemakers.
I think that's right. And the question I always get from families is, if my grandma has that pacemaker, does that mean she's going to live forever? Or does that mean that when it's her time to go, that pacemaker is going to keep her alive? And the answer is no. When God calls us, we're going to go, whether we have a pacemaker in it or whether we have a nuclear defibrillator in us. It's not going to stop that process.
And they're not that uncomfortable nowadays.
No.
Okay. Well, our next question is from actually a 30-year-old female. And her question is, she says, every day I feel like my heart's skipping. She says she does not pass out, but it bothers her greatly. Should I be concerned, and what should be the next step in evaluation? So it sounds like just having some palpitations.
Right.
And I hear that this one's pretty common.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is one that you guys see all the time. And again, I think so much depends on the individual. Part of what we do as physicians is we very carefully go through the history. Many people have palpitations. We used to call them bumps in the night. And I used to give a talk about that. And it was a community talk, and it would be, the room was filled with people because it's not uncommon. But there are settings like that that are more serious. If there's a family history of sudden death, or if we can get tracings and we show that the rhythms are going extremely fast or showing particular patterns that are more potentially life-threatening, then we move toward more invasive testing and a more serious look at things. But many times, I'd say 90% of the time, it's an extra beat from the top or bottom of the heart that is from a part of the heart that's innocuous or it's benign in origin. And then the choice is for someone that young, gee, do you want to take a medicine for the next 20 years that has its own side effects? Or if by explaining this to you, can you overcome what anxiety might be there and just leave it alone and go forward. And that's an individual patient decision.
One of the approaches that I use is, so, you know, these palpitations usually come from some type of underlying problem. You know, God didn't make us to have palpitations. And once we realize it's nothing serious, and we say, well, what could be stressing the system?
That's a very good point.
You know, sometimes it can be caffeine,
Yeah.
or sometimes by not be getting enough sleep,
Right.
or they might have personal relationships that aren't right.
Very good point.
I tell them there's something wrong with them, no doubt.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, if we can find out what that is and find out what it is and remove that stressor,
Yeah.
Maybe we can, you know, be more in harmony with the way we were created.
And that's a great point. I think so often we get focused on the pathophysiology, and you have to then step back and say, okay, do you have a child that's been ill, doing bad in school? Is your marriage just hitting a rough spot? What's going on here that has pushed you from someone who had no symptoms to suddenly be dealing with it? And everybody today, with the economy and the
Yes.
job, everybody has a degree of stress that they didn't have 5 or 10 years ago.
And this is an important question, because I think a lot more people are going to have some palpitations coming up.
I think that's right.
You know, and with our healthcare system is, you know, what is a reasonable approach in handling palpitations?
Right.
You know, and of course you want a good history and physical, and, you know, I always like to make sure their heart's strong.
Right.
And make sure they don't have anything like a thyroid or anemia or that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's going to be a big issue, because I think that this world is going to have some major changes coming up.
Yeah, I think we're all witnessing that every day.
Well, the next question we might have to get back after our breaks. We have a break coming in about 1 minute, Dave.
Okay.
And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is, as an electrophysiologist, as far as our country, and we can talk about this more, are we going to be able to keep up financially with our technology?
Yeah.
You know, technology is growing, the population's aging. Are we going to be able to keep up with this? And what is there a balance?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and I don't have the answer
There's
to that.
no answers to that one.
There is no answer to that one, I'm afraid.
Well, I hope you're enjoying Dr. Wendt's explanations about electrophysiology. And we're going to be talking more about this and answering your questions. But I want to invite you to remember, you can always get a hold of us by going to the website at heartwiseministries.org. Or if you don't have a computer and want to write us at Heartwise Ministries, P.O. Box 8, Ooltewah, Tennessee 37363, and we'll try to get your questions answered. But before we go to break, one of the things we've been emphasizing this year on our programs is, at the heart of health is indeed love. And one of the treatments for almost every condition that we can add is love. So if you don't have a little love in your life, get a dog or cat, or go out and give someone a hug or a kiss today, and you'll improve your chemistry just a little bit. We'll be right back after this short break.
You can easily spend $90 on an expensive meal out. How about investing $89.94 in your future? Just think about the possibility of coming off those prescription pills and getting rid of all the side effects. Think about feeling better than you have ever felt in your life. This is all possible for you. For only $89.94, you will receive a 7-part DVD series, Weight Management by the Book, a 30-lesson workbook with over 100 recipes, and if ordered today, exercise tubes will be included for free to help with your journey. There are many programs available, but this unique program has identified the truth about how to manage weight. This program is not available in stores. This limited offer will not last long. Pick up the phone now and dial 877-504-9628. Operators are standing by. This call will change your life forever.
There's a place for modern medicine, but that's not enough. There's a place for lifestyle, but that's not enough. The real truth in medicine, the real truth in healing comes from that relationship with the Heavenly Father. That relationship can show us the balance, when to use modern medicine, when to use lifestyle, and to use it for the right reasons. Well, this book gives the solution to the healthcare dilemma. It answers the question, why am I sick? How do I get better? And how can I have ultimate healing? Welcome back to Bible RX. I'm glad you've taken time out of your busy schedule to learn something about your bodies and the health world that we live in. We're so fortunate today to have Dr. David Wendt, an electrophysiologist with the Chattanooga Heart Institute, with us. And I know firsthand how valuable he's been to my patients, whether it be in planning a pacemaker or a defibrillator or just seeing them through a tough situation. Dave, before break, we were talking about the economics of whether we're going to be able to afford this, and I agree. I don't think there's any good answer to some of these things, and I think it's going to be time and prudent decision makers that are going to move through this. But one thing we want everyone to do is be educated about what's out there and to understand what decisions they have. And we're answering people's questions, and the next one is very fascinating. And this person is actually not that old, 59 years old, had a couple bypass surgeries, and he's recently been told his cardiologist his ejection fraction, or his strength of the heart, is about 28%.
Wow.
He doesn't feel well, but his cardiologist is recommending a device called a defibrillator. And this patient says, you know, the cardiologist did not talk to me very long, and I don't know whether I should get one or not.
Right.
So he's wanting a little extra guidance on this issue about whether they should have a defibrillator.
Right.
Doesn't feel bad.
Right. And as you know, these are patients that, of course, you see all the time, too. And before I get into the answer, I do want to just respond a bit to Jim, too. Medicine is so complicated today, and all of us rely heavily on our colleagues. And while I may be an electrophysiologist, I rely on the folks who do the imaging. I rely on everybody to take care of these patients. And I kind of have a little sphere. But boy, I'll tell you, without our collegiality and our interactions, we can't take care of everybody the way they need to be cared for. But let me go back to the patient.
Yeah.
So the ejection fraction is a number that we use commonly. It means that every time the heart squeezes, it ejects out a certain amount of blood and saves the rest to reprime the pump, if you will, and that normal number is 55%. And a long time ago, years ago now, people did a number of studies, and they found that if that number was less than 30 or 35, there was a much higher risk of something called sudden cardiac death. The story of the development of this device is absolutely fascinating. There was a Jewish physician, Dr. Murawski, who was in school in Israel, and his beloved professor had a heart attack, and they were sitting at the table one day, and he passed out, and he had this thing called ventricular tachycardia. And Murawski became very sad and said to his wife, you know, this is awful, and she didn't understand that. And he said, well, he's going to have this again, and he will die. There must be something we can do. So he, on his own, went basically to a small room in a lab, and again, just like Earl Bakken, developed this device. He came to the United States, went to a number of medical schools. Finally, Hopkins said, we'll give you a closet across the street in the basement, leave us alone, and we won't talk to you. And when he had the device completed, he went to the companies, and they said, we don't believe this, so we're not going to do it. And he went to the national meetings, put the device in a dog that he had. The dog fibrillated, and the device delivered a shock, and the dog got up and walked off the stage. And everybody realized at that point, we have something that can really make a difference. So today, when we see patients in this category, instead of being sad, we can say, okay, these are the options. We have an opportunity to prevent this episode of sudden death and keep you safe for your family. And 59 is not that old anymore, and the older I get, the younger it seems, of course. So the devices have come through a number of generations. This is kind of a mid-level generation. It used to be about this big. They got put in the bellies, and now they're at this size today. And they actually, like the pacemaker, just go under the skin up in this area and are implanted very simply with a couple of leads. So what I do when I talk to patients who have a need for these devices is I'll say, look, these are the statistics. This is where your heart ejection fraction is. The likelihood of you having an episode of sudden death is much higher than the average individual. This is going to keep you safe. It's not going to change your life in any way, except if you go through the airport. You're going to have a hand check probably. The batteries last 5 to 7 years, and then we go through what the device does. It's like having an EMT in your body, always watching.
Wow.
So if that heart goes into a life-threatening rhythm, it detects it, it delivers therapy, either pacing or a shock, and you wake up and you're fine usually. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's just the small sketch of it.
Getting back to our question, would you recommend, this is a person that hasn't felt bad since his bypass, his ejection fraction is below that threshold. His doctor says, listen, we should have it, but he doesn't feel bad.
Yeah.
What would you say on this?
He probably needs it.
Okay.
I mean, this is the individual who you recommend getting one of these devices.
So he's not really going to die from his heart attack or his heart failure. He's going to die from this dangerous heart rhythm.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Now, he may
Right.
die from other things too, but we know that this risk is serious, and we know that this is the thing that takes relatively young people away from their families after they've had bypass surgery or have had a heart attack, and we can prevent that.
And there's been some well-done studies
Yeah.
proven scientifically.
Right.
You know, so many of the things we see out there on the media, and that's why we have this type of media, is because we want to, you know, give a balance and let people know what truth. Some of the people claims about, they make claims that this will cure this or this herb and that,
Right.
and there's really no evidence.
Right.
But the defibrillator is a very strong evidence-based medicine,
Yes,
isn't it?
it is. And it's not for everybody. I certainly have people who are anxious about having these in, and they're anxious about getting shocks. They're in their mid-80s. They go, you know, I've lived a good life. I feel fine. If I go home tomorrow and I die and I'm with the Lord, I've made my peace with that. I really don't want to go through this other procedure. And that's fine.
Right.
And I think our job is to present the data and to get a sense of where that individual is in their life and what their needs are and what their family's needs are.
And I think that's very important. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to that said, no, I'm really happy with my life.
Right.
I've reached this point where I just really don't want to have that happen anymore. And it's perfect, but
That's
you
fine.
offer them that. And I think that's part of good medicine, giving them, and sometimes they even ask, well, what would you do?
Right.
And that's really when it becomes hard.
Right. That's always
And
a
then I
hard
say,
one.
well, I don't know what I'd do, but you know, with these concomitant medical problems, you know, sometimes I think this could go either way.
Yeah.
An interesting story I had just last week, I had a gentleman that had a defibrillator on, and he was actually dying from another malignancy, sarcoma, and we turned off his defibrillator.
Right.
But his son was in the room and said, listen, this defibrillator has defibrillated my dad 3 times over 8 years, whereas I've had these great 8 years with him.
Right.
Can I have one? You know, he asked for one. I said, well, I don't think we're putting him in anybody that has completely healthy hearts. Those hearts don't necessarily see a benefit.
Right. But you're exactly right. And I get these stories too where people have had it go off 2 or 3 times. It's given them extra 8 to 10 years with their family. They watched a grandchild graduate from high school. That is worth the effort to go forward and say, what can we do to keep these folks going?
And you know, sometimes, you know, that extra time that they have, they can make decisions and do things with their life that if you didn't have that opportunity, you know, they might not be able to accomplish certain things. And I've seen several people have gotten these devices and they've really had a sort of a change of heart. They realize that their time might be short. They've made decisions. They've learned how to love better, take care of their families better. And then you say, hey, this is on an eternal scale, this was very worth it.
Absolutely. I mean, if a grandfather can repair a relationship with his son or daughter and be a part of a grandchild's life, that benefit has innumerable repercussions that we can't even fathom.
And as a society, we can't put a monetary value on that.
No.
You know, we cannot do that.
No.
I know that those discussions will be coming up, but you just can't put a value on what that means to a family, or even to make your life right.
Right.
And some people get that extra chance to do that.
Right. That is a miracle. Even though it's science, it's a miracle.
Well, let's move on to our next question. This is actually from a 24-year-old. She says, I'm 24 years old and I have a condition called SVT. Okay, SVT is what she has. I've tried one medication and it makes me tired all the time. My doctor asked me to see an electrophysiologist to consider a procedure called an ablation. I'm really not familiar with that. Could you fill me in? So she's asking about an ablation. I guess she wants our recommendation whether this is something that she should even consider.
So ablations are a whole arena of electrophysiology that started out probably 20 years ago or so. There was a condition called WPW, as you know, Wolff Parkinson White, and Dr. White was actually the cardiologist for President Eisenhower, and they found that there was a little extra circuit in the heart, and instead of the impulse going down to the bottom of the heart normally, it would click onto that circuit and then just start racing away with itself. And for many years, there was nothing we could do. In the 1970s and 80s at Duke, we would actually do open heart surgery where we would put a probe on our finger, open the heart up, like an ohm meter, track where the circuits were, and then cut it with a knife. And that success rate was only about 80%. So as time went on, we were able, not we, but people were able to develop catheters that could deliver like a microwave burn just specifically to that area. And a fellow named Sonny Jackman in Oklahoma was the first to really show that this could have a curative benefit. And now you can go in through a groin, through a vein in the leg, with a small catheter up to the heart, localize that circuit, turn on that energy, and it's gone. And it's been a revolution for people like this young lady. Many times we see this in younger folks, and boy, I don't know if you have, your kids are not quite that old yet, but young adults, be they 15 to 28, are not the most compliant with medicines. They've got things going on in their lives that are grabbing their attention every moment of the day, and they're trying to live, and they don't want to be tied down by taking a medicine. And so the ablation offers a way to cure this problem and get them off medicines, basically. And there are a number of these iterations out there.
Now, is this a safe procedure, or would it be safer?
Yeah, I mean, in our hands, it's been very safe. Certainly early on in any technology, there's a learning curve and there are complications, but tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of these have been done worldwide, and the risk is certainly less than a fraction of a percent.
Wow, so it sounds like the risk of the rhythm itself and passing out and hurting yourself in a car might be even greater than the risk of the procedure.
And not only the physical risk, but the psychological risk. Here's a young woman, and she wants to go out with her friends. They're at a football game, and suddenly her heart starts, and she's got to run home. And there are a number of issues there that this potentially can address.
And also, you won't have to take that lifelong medication, which with its side effect. And sometimes these medicines don't even work.
That's right. And they always are two-edged swords, as you know. So,
well, that's very interesting. Well, so I guess the answer to that one is, you know, we would probably say that it's something that I would definitely consider getting the ablation. And right now, we're ablating all sorts of different types of rhythms.
Yeah.
And that was a great explanation. I actually got a good feel for it. I didn't know they'd use an ohm meter and did the scalpel.
Basically, yeah. We're basically electricians, you know.
Wow,
so.
that is neat. We're about out of time here today on Bible RX, but we want to thank you for joining us. And again, we want to give you a chance to be a part of this ministry. You can be a part of this ministry by sending us your questions or comments. We can be reached at Heartwise Ministries, P.O. Box 8, Ottawa, Tennessee, 37363. or on our website at heartwiseministries.org. And as we close, I want everyone to think of our motto this year: at the heart of health is love. So no matter what you might be going through, search for that balance. And remember that love is at the core. It's a healing treatment that we all must strive for every day. So if you don't have a love in your life, we want to invite you to try to find that somewhere. Thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. James Markham, and I talk to patients every day who want to know the truth in healthcare. On our website, heartwiseministries.org, you can have your questions answered. You can read my blog where I talk about interesting and controversial subjects in medicine. You might choose to go to the radio or television sections and learn more about all sorts of health topics. Take the time and go to heartwiseministries.org.